November 1941. The world teetered on the brink. In the Pacific, an unseen war was already brewing, a struggle that would ultimately decide the fate of nations. It was a campaign fought in the crushing silence of the deep, a conflict often overshadowed by grander battles, yet one that would prove decisively instrumental. The U.S. submarine offensive against Japan, a critically underappreciated war within a war, would ultimately secure victory, potentially rendering later, more conventional invasions unnecessary. But this profound success was achieved despite significant initial handicaps. The journey to this decisive weapon began centuries earlier, born from ingenuity and often necessity. In 1775, David Bushnell crafted the Turtle, a one-man hand-propelled diving chamber, a primitive vision of underwater warfare. Robert Fulton, the inventor of the steam engine, designed his Nautilus for Napoleon in 1800, and the Confederate H.L. Hunley famously sank the Union sloop Housatonic in 1864, a chilling demonstration of submarine potential. Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 1870 provided a public relations breakthrough, capturing the public's imagination. The critical component, the self-propelled torpedo, emerged between 1864 and 1866, developed by Giovanni Lupis and Robert Whitehead. A 14-foot-long, 300-pound marvel, powered by compressed air, it could reach 6 knots over 700 yards, a formidable, if nascent, weapon. The adaptation of the gyroscope for torpedo control by M. Ludwig Aubry would further refine its accuracy. Yet for many years, the US-9 its accuracy, Navy remained largely unconvinced. Influential naval strategists, like Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan, focused on decisive fleet battles with battleships, overshadowing the quiet potential of submarines. It was French naval strategy, the guerre de course, or war of the chase, that systematically invested in submarine development in 1886. Their aim was to break British blockades, to allow their light cruisers to get to sea. This made France the first nation to fully commit state resources to a systematic submarine program. The US Navy, by contrast, initially perceived submarines as mere coastal defense extensions, not offensive weapons. John Philip Holland, a true submarine genius, developed the critical internal combustion system. His privately funded Holland Fix, demonstrated on the Potomac, earned the endorsement of Admiral George Dewey, who famously stated that 2 such craft in Manila would have rendered it impregnable. Even Assistant Secretary of the Navy Theodore Roosevelt supported the Holland VIF, leading to the commissioning of the U.S. HAS, Holland, as submarine hull number 1 on October 12, 1900. By 1910, Holland's Electric Boat Company had built 11 more gasoline battery submarines, some as long as 105 feet, mounting 2 torpedo tubes. But torpedo development was a different story. The USAO, the USI, Navy's Bureau of Ordnance, derisively known as the Gun Club, was described as slow, cautiously, unimaginatively, and, at times, stupidly. For 3 decades, the USIN imaginatively depended on foreign ingenuity for its torpedoes, eventually building a factory in Newport, Rhode Island, in 1907 to manufacture British steam torpedoes, prioritizing production over crucial research. Bureaucratic inertia at Newport would prove a stubborn obstacle. Across the Atlantic, European powers rapidly advanced. By 1907, France led with 85 submarines. Britain, though initially reluctant, licensed Holland designs, with Sir John Fisher declaring a revolution in naval strategy the submarine would accomplish astounding. By 1910, Britain had 50 submarines. The volatile gasoline engines were soon replaced by Rudolf Diesel's heavy oil engine. Perfected by 1895, British submarines began using heavy oil engines from 1908, and by 1909 the D1 was entirely diesel-powered. Germany, initially playing down submarines to focus on its battle fleet under Admiral von Tirpitz, soon followed. Krupp built the tiny submarine Forel in 1902, and Russia's order for 3 larger submarines during the Russo-Japanese War spurred German development. The first German submarine, U-1, launched in 1905, was a copy of the Carp. By the eve of World War I, approximately 400 submarines were in service worldwide, with Germany possessing 26. On August 6, 1914, 10 old German U-boats embarked on their first offensive sweep, a new chapter in naval warfare. Just weeks later, on September 22, 1914, Lieutenant Otto Weddigen, commanding U-9, sank 3 British cruisers, and Hogue, lieutenant under an hour, a devastating loss of 1,400 men. This single event fundamentally demonstrated the submarine's disruptive potential. The German U-boat blockade, declared on February 4, 1915, created a war zone around the British Isles. In the first 3 months, U-boats sank 33 ships, totaling 100,000 tons. The sinking of the Lusitania, with 126 Americans lost, and later the Arabic, led to severe limitations on U-boat operations. British radio intelligence breaking German naval codes and the establishment of radio direction finding stations provided critical location data on U-boat operations. Yet the convoy system, a crucial countermeasure, was not adopted at this early stage. Germany's strategic need for a decisive blow against Britain, coupled with the availability of new, larger U-boats, led to the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare in February 1917. In the first 3 months of that year, U-boats sank 1,000 Allied merchant and passenger ships, with tonnage losses peaking at an astonishing 800,000 in April. US 100,000 in April. Ambassador Walter H. Page called the submarine the most formidable thing the war has produced by far. This desperate gamble, disregarding American warnings, directly precipitated the USI entry into World War I on April 6, 1917. Germany built 373 U-boats during the war, losing 178, but for every U-boat lost, 32 Allied ships sank. The U.S. Navy's General Board, already advocating for a navy second to none, in 1915, began building new submarines, though initially designed for coastal defense. The S-class submarines, a notable advance at 230 feet and 800 tons, could carry 12 torpedoes. Admiral William S.S. Sims, the first to recognize the U-boat as the primary threat, advocated fiercely for convoy systems and destroyer deployment. His vision clashed with the prevailing USA naval doctrine, Plan Black, which focused on decisive fleet battles. The success of the convoy system was undeniable. Allied shipping losses fell from 800,000 tons per month to 300,000. Only 134 ships were lost in convoy during 9 months of 1918, compared to 999 sailing alone. U.S. of Fifth. Submarines were deployed to Europe in 1917, where American submariners observed the technological superiority of British and German designs in speed, range, and diving capabilities. Post-war, the USIA Navy's Plan Orange for the naval defeat of Japan heavily influenced future fleet vessel characteristics. It became clear that early USIPA submarines were inadequate for fleet operations. German cruiser submarine designs at 2,700 tons, 17 knots surface speed, and a 5,000-mile range set a new standard. American attempts like the T-class submarines were slow, clumsy, and unreliable. German diesel engines were considered a fine art. The US stations were considered a fine art. V-class submarine program authorized 3 boats of 2,000 tons, based on German designs and powered by new diesels. Despite the submarine's demonstrated power, public and political opposition, fueled by the brutality of U-boat warfare, led to calls for their abolition, even supported by the British Admiralty. Admiral William Shepard Benson, US-supported Benson, Chief of Naval Operations, advocated for abolishing the submarine force entirely, a reflection of big ship conservatism. The interwar period, often overlooked, was a critical phase. It paradoxically fostered a culture of innovation and secret development within the U.S. submarine force despite significant political and economic pressures. The Washington Naval Conference of 1921 to 1922, intended to limit naval arms, ironically solidified the submarine's controversial status. Outright abolition was rejected, and tonnage limitations proved largely superficial. Nations remained legally at liberty to build as many submarines as they pleased, and to employ them in wartime however conscience dictated. The conference agreement significantly impacted Pacific basing strategy, implicitly increasing the importance of submarines for long-range operations. Britain's offer to scrap the largest, most modern, most efficient submarine fleet in the world, was ultimately declined. The US, Britain, and Japan agreed to a 5-5-3 ratio for battleships and aircraft carriers, and a 10-year holiday on building capital ships. But even as conventional naval power was constrained, a clandestine revolution was underway. The early 1920s saw the establishment of the Black Chamber under Herbert Osborne Yardley, the foremost USA&D's cryptologist focused on breaking Japanese diplomatic codes. Emerson J. Haworth, a former missionary to Japan, was hired to translate Japanese Navy code books, the Red Code. Lieutenant Lawrence Fry Safford, a submariner, commanded the Navy's research desk for code breaking and founded a code-breaking school. Mrs. Agnes Meyer Driscoll, a code-breaking genius, became the foremost authority on Japanese naval codes. This initiation of systematic code-breaking marked a crucial turning point, providing intelligence that would prove invaluable. Simultaneously, critical technological advancements were secretly pursued. By the summer of 1922, the Bureau of Ordnance appropriated $25,000 for influence exploitation. Lieutenant Ralph Waldo Christie, a submarine officer, led much of this important torpedo research. The realization that torpedoes needed to detonate beneath armored hulls, leading to the secret Project G-53 for a magnetic exploder, represented a significant technological leap. On May 8, 1926, a historic first secret test of the magnetic exploder was conducted at the Newport Torpedo Station under Captain Thomas Hart. Despite these advancements, the second generation of fleet boats, the V-class, completed in 1925-26, faced significant hurdles. Their Bush-Sulzer diesels failed to generate design power and were unreliable. Fuel tank leaks left a telltale oil slick on the water. They were slow-diving, unwieldy, submerged, and failed to reach their design speeds. Some even developed dangerous crankshaft explosions. By 1930, the London Naval Treaty imposed some tonnage and armament limits, setting U.S. submarine tonnage limits at 52,700 tons and maximum submarine size at 2,000 tons. It also codified international norms for submarine warfare. Article 22, the route resolution, requiring visit and search of merchant ships. This period, characterized by budgetary constraints, paradoxically fostered innovation, the foundational work in code-breaking, and the relentless pursuit of better submarine technology, despite numerous setbacks, positioned the U.S. submarine force for its pivotal role in World War II. The perception that the U.S. and HID Navy neglected submarines in the interwar period is largely a myth. Instead, strategic re-evaluation and secret development were driven by evolving global naval powers. As the 1930s progressed, the American submarine program and its supporting technologies were severely underdeveloped and plagued by design flaws and bureaucratic inertia. The Mark XIV torpedo, with its 500-pound warhead, fired at speeds up to 46 knots, was designed for a magnetic exploder, the Mark VI. Yet, a fundamental flaw emerged, a critical, inexplicable, and scandalous lapse. Despite a successful secret test in 1926, a refusal to conduct realistic live testing of the redesigned Mark VI exploder on a decommissioned destroyer like the Erickson persisted for years. Only 30 units were ever produced, at a cost of $30,000 each, tested in artificial fields, and a single limited field test with the cruiser Indianapolis. The electric eye photoelectric device was never approved. Instead, a dummy contact exploder, the Mark V, was issued to the fleet, while the Mark VI was secured. This would have dire consequences. In the realm of intelligence, Japan's advancement in radio direction finding technology left the U.S. Navy significantly behind. Japanese changes to their diplomatic and naval codes around 1930 forced an upgrade in U.S. code-breaking capabilities. The Blue Code was solved by Thomas Harold Dyer and Mrs. Driscoll with early IBM punch card equipment by 1933. The Red Machine, built by Jack Sebastian Holtwick, could automatically read Japanese naval attaché traffic. The first US METS RDF units were finally shipped to the Philippines, with others to Pearl Harbor, Dutch Harbor, and Samoa. The perceived international diplomatic landscape from Japan's expansionism to Hitler's rise, along with the economic climate of the Depression, ironically spurred a naval building program. In 1933, Congress voted $238 million for new naval vessels, including a plan for 3 aircraft carriers, 7 battleships, 11 cruisers, and 108 destroyers. Between 1935 and 1939, 26 new submarines were commissioned, the P and Salmon classes. These boats, around 300 feet long and weighing 1,300 to 1,450 tons, carried up to 8 torpedo tubes and 3-inch deck guns. They could dive within 60 seconds. Diesel-electric drive, 4 engines, 4 generators, and flexible power distribution became standard. New batteries of approximately 250 large cells improved submerged operations. The Mark I torpedo data computer, or TDC, first tried on Cachalot, manufactured by Armour Corporation, displayed battle data on dials. Air conditioning on the Peace and Salmons kept internal temperatures below 110 degrees Fahrenheit in tropical waters. Escape technologies, like Monson lungs and the McCann rescue chamber, offered hope for trapped submariners. Yet a tragic event in May 1939 would expose a critical flaw. The submarine Squalus sank in 243 feet of water, killing 23 men, though 33 were rescued. It exposed a serious defect in the Salmon-class main induction lid. The Squalus was later raised, refurbished, and renamed Sailfish. Internal debates continued over ideal submarine design. Admiral Thomas Hart preferred smaller, 800-ton boats, similar to World War I U-boats. A compromise in May 1938 led to 6 Tambor-class submarines and 2 prototypes Mackerel, Marlin for 1940. The Tambor class, at 310 feet and 1,500 tons, carried up to 24 torpedoes in 10 tubes, with new TDCs. However, a larger 5-inch gun was disapproved. Torpedo production remained insufficient, with the Newport factory producing only 591 torpedoes in 1937, facing a $29 million backlog. Meanwhile, Germany's U-boat force, only 57 boats at the outbreak of war in 1939, with just 22 oceangoing, soon demonstrated its devastating potential. The sinking of the passenger liner Athenia on September 3, 1939, marked the start of a grim tally. British anti-submarine assets included 220 vessels equipped with AS-DIC sonar. German Wolfpack tactics, Die Rudertaktik, emphasized night surface attacks against convoys. By September 1940, 300,000 tons of shipping were lost, rising to 346,000 tons in October. The Two-Ocean Navy Bill, passed in July 1940, allocated $4 billion, a significant sum, but insufficient to address critical technological and numerical deficiencies in submarines. 38 older submarines were recommissioned, a stark indicator of the urgent need. The U.S. Pacific naval strategy was simultaneously hampered by a focus on Japan as the primary threat, leading to underestimations of fleet capabilities and complex, often contradictory, defense plans. Japanese code complexity was relentless. They repeatedly changed their naval and diplomatic codes, forcing U.S. they air codebreakers to constantly adapt and collaborate across services. Crucially, this was achieved by an unprecedented display of inter-service harmony between the Navy's Lawrence Safford and the Army's William Friedman. Friedman, leading the assault on the diplomatic Purple Code, even experienced a collapse from the intense mental strain. His team's Harry Lawrence Clark provided the final solution for Purple, while Wesley Arnold, Ham, Wright achieved the initial break into the Japanese Navy Black Code. Tom Dyer later corrected errors in Wright's work, transferred to Pearl Harbor to establish the Haipoi code-breaking unit. In the Philippines, Spencer August Carlson and Rudolph Joseph Fabian led the CAST unit. By June 1940, the Japanese Navy again changed codes, introducing the Flag Officers Code and the infinitely easier IN-25. This was cracked within 3 months, providing solid translations from September 1940. The Purple Machine, a hand-built, sparking maze of wiring, switches, and rotors, was used to decrypt Japanese diplomatic codes. Its output, known as magic, was vital U.S. Bidal intelligence. By early 1941, strategy formally shifted, designating Germany as the primary threat, leading to the division of the fleet and a defensive posture for the Pacific. Admiral Ernest Joseph King commanded the Atlantic Fleet, and Admiral Husband Edward Kimmel the Pacific Fleet. Despite growing Japanese aggression, the Asiatic Fleet, under Admiral Thomas Hart, was pitifully inadequate, composed of the heavy cruiser Houston, the light cruiser Marblehead, 13 aged destroyers, and 6 ancient S-boats plus their tender Canopus. This led to a fragmented and reactive defense strategy for the Philippines. By December 1940, Admiral Hart's Asiatic Fleet submarine force consisted of 6 S-class and 11 P-class boats. By October 1941, it swelled to 29 submarines. On paper, Admiral Withers at Pearl Harbor commanded 21 fleet boats, but in November 1941, only 10 were actually in port. The Mark VI magnetic exploder, a secret weapon, was introduced with limited information on its adjustment or repair, leading to blind faith by the submarine force. By January 1941, Fleet Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had worked out most of the details for the Pearl Harbor attack. Prime Minister Tojo decided to widen the Asian War, aiming for complete Far Eastern control. The strategic necessity of destroying US, British, and Dutch naval forces was paramount. Yamamoto's audacious plan for a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor overrode his planners, who favored luring the fleet into the Far East. On November 25, 1941, the wind's message deadline for breaking off talks was set. 2 days later, Admiral Stark sent war warnings to Admirals Kimmel and Hart, but these primarily focused on the Philippines, not Pearl Harbor. Critically, the Japanese strike force maintained absolute radio silence during its transit to Pearl Harbor. Inadvertently, the seizure of Japanese merchant marine codebooks in San Francisco in May 1941 led to Japan adopting a new unreadable code. Repeated changes in Japanese call signs and the cessation of carrier traffic by mid-November further masked fleet movements. On December 1, 1941, the Japanese Navy changed keys to IN-25, making it unreadable just before the attack. This created a critical intelligence blackout. The practice of Admiral Kimmel receiving verbatim magic output was abandoned around mid-1941. The wind's message, indicating a diplomatic breakdown, was misinterpreted or dismissed by US codebreakers. Washington, despite possessing sophisticated intelligence, failed to specifically anticipate or adequately warn of an attack on Pearl Harbor. At midnight on December 6, 1941, 5 I-class midget carriers launched their baby submarines. On December 7, 1941, at about 8 a.m., the attack began on Pearl Harbor. The first alert to submarine command came at 7:55 a.m. In the immediate chaos of December 7, 1941, the U.S. submarine force faced critical vulnerabilities and operational challenges. Friendly fire incidents abounded. The submarine Thresher was mistaken for a Japanese submarine and fired upon by a U.S. submarine. Four-stacker. It was repeatedly driven off by friendly forces and later bombed by U.S. Army Air Corps planes, the first instance of U.S. submarines attacked by friendly aircraft in the war. 6 hours after the Pearl Harbor attack, the directive came: execute ou restricted, unrestricted, and submarine warfare against Japan. Submarine mission, abandoning pre-war treaties. The focus shifted from Plan Orange - a decisive fleet battle to attacking Japanese sea lines of communication. Admiral Kimmel, concerned about a second Japanese strike, ordered submarine deployments to the Marshall Islands and Empire waters. 7 of the 9 available submarines were deployed, 4 to the Marshalls and 3 to Empire waters. On December 11th, the Gudgeon, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Joe Grenfell, a 38-year-old Naval Academy graduate, departed Pearl Harbor. This marked the first offensive strike against Imperial Japan by the U.S. Navy, with approximately 60 men and a critical torpedo shortage that limited them to 1 or 2 per merchant ship. The Gudgeon embarked on a slow, tedious, monotonous voyage to reach Japan, taking nearly 20 days, remaining submerged during the day, surfacing at night to charge batteries with 4 lookouts and the officer of the deck on watch. The psychological toll was immediate. For the first time, one crewman noted, "You realized that you could get killed." The gudgeon's first successful attack resulted in the sinking of a 5,000-ton freighter. Torpedo firing, even with the torpedo data computer, was complex. Estimating range and angle on the bow, from quick periscope observations, was a high-stress task. Peacetime training with destroyers proved vastly different from actual combat against slow, shallow-draft merchant ships. Orders to conserve torpedoes led to a revision of torpedo spread techniques. Other early patrols experienced immediate difficulties. The Pollock initially suffered from missed torpedoes, leading to a dismissal of night periscope attacks. Later, it shifted to aggressively firing 6 torpedoes at a single transport. The Plunger experienced an initial casualty, a serious leak in the pressure hull, a Navy Yard error. It was also equipped with a primitive radar set known as the SD, with a limited range of 6 to 10 miles and a non-directional nature. The most startling realization came with the Japanese anti-submarine capabilities. After an attack, a Japanese destroyer was heard pinging, then unleashed 24 close depth charges on the Plunger. Commander White realized the Japanese had it, they knew how to use it. The submarine Argonaut chose to remain submerged, avoiding engagement with multiple Japanese destroyers near Midway. The Triton believed it had sunk a target with its first live shot, using a sonar attack. The Tambor's torpedo missed nothing, and the sub descended to 310 feet due to perceived confusion and fear of counterattack. The early months of the Pacific War were severely hampered by a combination of critical torpedo malfunctions, inexperienced command, and a flawed operational doctrine. Despite the bravery of crews, this led to disappointing initial results and significant strategic disadvantages. Pre-war doctrine, with its over-reliance on peacetime training concepts, like emphasis on sonar and aircraft detection, proved insufficient for actual combat. Intelligence gaps and underestimation also played a role. Early radio intelligence, though imperfect, was not fully trusted or acted upon, leading to misallocation of submarines to the marshals. Material deficiencies were rampant. The Pompano, which got underway for its first patrol on December 18, 1941, suffered from temperamental HOR diesel engines. On January 12, 1942, the Pompano attacked the Japanese transport, Yawata, estimated at 16,000 tons, but its torpedoes detonated prematurely. Lou Parks, the skipper, even innovatively used periscope photography to document the action. The Dolphin, commanded by Dizzy Rayner, experienced 17 major and 18 minor mechanical failures during its patrol, and Rayner himself collapsed under psychological strain. Its jury rig antenna was a sign of degraded materiel, but radio intelligence would soon prove its potential. Joseph Rochefort and the hypo-code-breaking unit, working on a 24-hour footing sustained by pep pills, tracked 3 Japanese submarines passing Midway Island on January 25, 1942. 2 days later, on January 27, 1942, the Gudgeon attacked one of them. It was the I-173. This sinking was declared the first major Japanese man-of-war sunk in World War II, and the first vessel to go down as a direct result of radio intelligence. This marked a significant shift, demonstrating the power of cryptanalysis. The existing primitive RDF gear, a limitation in tracking submarines, would soon be upgraded. Admiral Withers's critical endorsements on patrol reports forced a rapid re-evaluation of submarine tactics. He endorsed more aggressive approaches, like night surface attacks, challenging the peacetime emphasis on sonar over periscope or surface attacks. He criticized submarines taking too long to reach station, implying a need for more aggressive surface transit. The critical shortage of torpedoes was stark. Only 101 reserve torpedoes were left in Pearl Harbor. The failure to develop Wolfpack tactics was acknowledged as a critical oversight in pre-war planning. The appointment of submariners Admiral King and Admiral Nimitz to key commands signaled a new era for the U.S. Navy. The initial patrols yielded far fewer confirmed sinkings than claimed, highlighting the steep learning curve. The failure to effectively deploy available submarine assets also contributed to the loss of strategically important Wake Island. The fall of the Philippines, a devastating early loss, demonstrated the inadequacy of pre-war planning and the brutal efficiency of the Japanese military. The American defense was fatally undermined by critical command failures, technological shortcomings, and an underestimation of Japanese operational precision. Admiral Hart had his Asiatic fleet on a war footing since November 27, 1941, implementing a layered submarine defense plan. The Japanese war plan, however, was meticulously synchronized. A severe weather delay in Formosa prevented the initial Japanese airstrike on Philippine airfields from occurring as planned on the morning of December 8, Manila time. General MacArthur's indestructible B-17 flying fortresses were intended to strike Formosan airfields. Despite having intelligence and the opportunity presented by the Japanese weather delay, MacArthur failed to immediately launch his B-17 SEF. At 11:30 a.m. on December 8, half of the B-17s were on the ground at Clark Field as Japanese bombers arrived. This devastating air raid crippled MacArthur's air power, destroying half of his air force within hours and securing air superiority for the Japanese. The Cavite Naval Station, a sitting duck without air cover, was next. Its destruction decimated crucial submarine support infrastructure, including the torpedo overhaul shop and the low-frequency radio tower. A barge carrying 48 Mark XIV torpedoes for Sea Dragon and Sealion capsized and lost its cargo. The submarine Sealion was deemed beyond hope, stripped of machinery, and destroyed. The 5 submariners killed during the Cavite raid were the first U.S. submariners to be killed in the war. The initial submarine plan assumed that there would be ample warning of a Japanese attack, that Japan would declare war in a formal way, and that MacArthur's aircraft would provide a reliable flow of intelligence. The secret Mark VI magnetic exploder, issued to submarines, was intended to improve torpedo effectiveness, but its widespread failure soon became evident. The Seawolf, commanded by Frederick Burdett Warder, fired 8 torpedoes at a Japanese seaplane tender and achieved 0 results, the magnetic exploder seemingly failing. The Skipjack, commanded by Charles Lawrence Harry Freeman, fired 3 torpedoes at an aircraft carrier, all missing due to a range miscalculation. The early days revealed critical flaws. Tyrrell Dwight Jacobs, commanding the Sargo, experienced a torpedo exploding prematurely on December 14, shaking his submarine. He concluded the Mark XIV torpedo was running deeper than its settings, attributing it to heavier warheads. He fired 8 torpedoes at 4 separate targets with 0 results, and later 13 torpedoes in 6 separate attacks with none exploding. His request to test torpedoes on a fishnet was denied due to a shortage of torpedoes. A torpedo expert from the Bureau of Ordnance, a Mr. Spett Fonnet Walker, would later place blame on Sargo personnel, despite evidence of gyro issues. Commander Morton Clare Mummer Jr. of the Sailfish, a disciplined commander, broke down under the pressure of about 18 or 20 charges during a depth charge attack. He was relieved of command by his subordinate. His later Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism was awarded more to save face than to reflect battlefield prowess. Strategic failures compounded the issues. Ray Lamb, commanding the Stingray, sighted the main Japanese invasion force for Lingayen Gulf on December 21, 1941, at 5:13 p.m. But leaky pipes, a small air leak, and a desire for repairs led him to withdraw from his patrol, missing the main Japanese invasion force. This undetected landing at Lingayen Gulf represented a significant strategic failure. Moonchapel, in the S-38, despite initial fear and torpedo misses, managed to sink one Japanese transport, the 54445-ton Hayomaru, at Lingayen Gulf on December 22, but an internal hydrogen gas explosion forced him to withdraw. Commander Eugene Bradley McKinney, in the Salmon, despite being detected and heavily depth-charged, believed he had sunk a destroyer, illustrating the uncertainty of combat assessment. Commander McKnight in the S-36 DAS suffered from a faulty receiver, preventing him from receiving crucial orders, leading to his unnecessary withdrawal. The S-40 was detected and depth-charged after an engine room report of a serious leak in exhaust valves, forcing the use of a noisy trim pump. The Permit was unable to maintain deep depth control, forcing Adrian Hurst to abandon his attempt to penetrate Lingayen Gulf. The loss of Manila and the subsequent failure to effectively counter the Japanese advance in the Philippines were primarily a result of catastrophic planning and execution failures by Allied leadership. On Christmas Eve, by Allied leadership, 1941, MacArthur informed Admiral Hart that Manila would be declared an open city. Japanese bombers attacked the Manila waterfront on Christmas Day. Admiral Hart departed Manila in the submarine Shark on December 26. General MacArthur's air forces were reduced to rubble on the ground due to a lack of dispersal and preemptive action, directly enabling Japanese troop landings. Logistical failures were severe. The destruction of all diesel oil stocks in Manila, intended for submarine operations, severely limited their operational capacity. Only 300,000 gallons were salvaged, all we had left to operate the 28 submarines on. On New Year's Eve, 1941, John Wilkes and 502, the submarine commander, whose headquarters on Corregidor was equipped with only a radio receiver and one typewriter, decided to abandon the Philippines and withdraw submarines to Surabaya, Java. 10 boats remained in Manila Bay, along with the critical tender Canopus. Wilkes could evacuate only 250 personnel per submarine. He and Fife departed Manila on the Swordfish and Seawolf. The text identifies 8 major errors in submarine doctrine, training, maintenance, basing, deployment, and operational orders that crippled the Asiatic fleet's effectiveness. The total number of attacks mounted by the Asiatic submarine force in December was 45, firing 96 torpedoes. Wilkes initially claimed 11 enemy ships sunk. However, post-war Japanese records confirmed a far lower number. Only 3 ships sunk. This period is presented as a profound military tragedy, greater than the damage at Pearl Harbor, due to its strategic implications. The swift Japanese conquest secured their flank as they pushed further south into Southeast Asia. The retreat of the Asiatic fleet submarines to Surabaya, Java, and Darwin, Australia, marked the effective end of the submarine war in the islands. The early months of the Pacific War continued to reveal a critical disconnect between the perceived threat and the operational realities of American submarines. This was exacerbated by systemic technical flaws, logistical shortcomings, and strategic miscalculations. A strong belief, based on code-breaking interpretations, in an impending Japanese thrust against Timor and Australia led to the misallocation of submarine assets. Submarines were moved away from more immediate threats in the West, such as Sumatra, Singapore, and the Malay Barrier. The widespread malfunction of the Mark XIV torpedo persisted. Its tendency to run too deep or prematurely explode severely hampered effectiveness. Bureaucratic inertia and a refusal to acknowledge the problem exacerbated the situation. Commander Jacobs in the Sargo, whose request to test torpedoes on a fishnet had been denied due to a shortage of torpedoes, experienced this directly. A torpedo expert from the Bureau of Ordnance continued to place blame on Sargo personnel despite clear evidence of gyro issues. Operational exhaustion was rampant. Crews operating for well over 2 months with little rest, insufficient maintenance, and critical shortages of parts, torpedoes, food, and functioning air conditioning experienced fatigue and compromised decision-making. Commander Joseph Callahan in the Porpoise explicitly admitted that exhaustion affected his judgment, stating, "I would have never given the orders to fire if I had been in full possession of my mental faculties." Navigation was treacherous, imprecise, and incomplete charts, coupled with foul weather, made accurate navigation difficult. This caused submarines to miss critical engagement opportunities. During the Battle of Balikpapan in January 1942, where 7 submarines concentrated to meet a Japanese Western invasion force of 26 ships and 14 destroyers, navigational errors were common. Sauri was 65 miles out, and Spearfish 17 miles out, missing the main Japanese force. The Sturgeon claimed sinkings totaling 3 ships for 20,000 tons, though these were unverified by JANIC, the Joint Army-Navy Assessment Committee. Its skipper, after reporting hits, famously sent the bawdy message, "Sturgeon no longer virgin," a rare moment of confidence amid the frustration. The S-36 ran hard aground on Takabekang Reef, due to imprecise charts and dead reckoning. Commander McKnight sent a plain-language distress message, aground Takabakan sinking. A Dutch launch and the Dutch ship SS Cybrote were involved in the rescue effort. This was the second U.S. submarine loss of the war. The Sea Dragon, commanded by Farrell, patrolling Cameron Bay, encountered 11 troopships escorted by a cruiser and 3 destroyers. He fired 13 torpedoes over 8 attacks, with only 1 hit causing damage. After a bombing, the black paint peeled off his sub. exposing a red lead undercoating, earning it the nickname the Red Dragon. Early confirmed sinkings were devastatingly low. By January 1942, only 3 confirmed ships had been sunk by USA submarines in the key operational areas. In the first 2 months of the war, the 28 Asiatic Fleet submarines sank a total of 6 confirmed ships, while the Shark and S-36 were lost. Submarines were also diverted for dangerous and morale-sapping special missions. The Seawolf carried 675 boxes of 50 caliber ammunition and 72 3-inch anti-aircraft shells to Corregidor. The Sea Dragon evacuated 25 people from Corregidor, including 17 members of the cast code-breaking unit, carrying the precious red and purple machines. The Sargo delivered 666 cases of 30 caliber ammunition to Mindanao. The Swordfish evacuated Philippine President Quezon and his party to Panay, and later U.S. High Commissioner Francis B. Sayer and his party. Intelligence misdirection continued. The Negat, Hippo, and cast code-breaking units were reading Japanese naval mail, tracking carrier divisions 1 and 2 to Palau. However, Admiral King informed Admiral Helfrich that intelligence indicated a main thrust against Timor, 700 miles east of Java. This strategic decision to prioritize an eastern defense left the western approaches to Java dangerously under-patrolled, with only 2 submarines, the Sairavan and S-39, covering them. The shift of the S-41 north from Balikpapan resulted in uncovering the entire length of the Makassar Strait. This contributed to the swift fall of Sumatra and Singapore. On February 14th, Palembang was seized by paratroopers, and on February 15th, Singapore surrendered. Yet, amid these setbacks, there were glimmers of success. The S-37, commanded by Dempsey, achieved the first confirmed sinking of a Japanese destroyer of the war for the U.S. Navy, the Natushi. The American submarine offensive was a war within a war, a prolonged and painful learning curve. It began with significant handicaps: defective torpedoes, conservative doctrine, leadership struggles, and intelligence misdirection. But through this crucible of fire, the force slowly transformed. The eventual decisive impact of the submarine campaign, the economic strangulation of Japan, the decimation of its navy, ultimately secured victory. It forced a re-evaluation of naval warfare itself, demonstrating the profound impact of commerce raiding when effectively executed and supported by intelligence. The traditional view of the necessity of later invasions might indeed be overstated. The silent hunter, once an experimental curiosity, emerged as an indispensable weapon, reshaping the course of naval history. However, the brutal reality of early 1942 revealed a desperate situation. The defensive operations around Java became a tragically mismanaged effort. It was characterized by a profound lack of timely intelligence. Japanese codebreakers had completely missed the main thrust against Java itself. Allied forces were caught by surprise, deployed reactively against sideshows. Initial Japanese landings on Bali and Timor were diversions. These masked a far more formidable invasion force assembling for Java. The sheer scale was staggering. 96 transports. They were escorted by approximately 40 warships. A further carrier task force of 4 carriers, 2 battleships, and supporting vessels positioned south of Java. This massive fleet, tragically, was completely undetected. Operational mismanagement further compounded the disaster. Admiral Helfrich ordered submarines to travel on the surface in daylight for redeployment. This was despite protests from experienced commanders like Commander John Wilkes. It demonstrated a disregard for established safety protocols. A flawed understanding of submarine warfare risks became painfully evident. Equipment deficiencies were a crippling blow to morale and effectiveness. The widespread issue of defective torpedoes, particularly the contact exploders, plagued every patrol. This significantly hampered submarine effectiveness. It contributed to missed opportunities for critical hits. A deep psychological strain settled upon the submarine crews. Command disagreements and frustration boiled over between leaders. Admiral Helfrich was openly scornful of U.S. submarine effectiveness. Commander Wilkes, leading the Asiatic Fleet submarine force, fiercely defended his men and their equipment. This internal friction highlighted deep leadership conflicts. On February 17, 1942, Japanese forces landed on Timor. The next day, February 18th, Japanese forces landed on Bali. February 19th saw carrier-based planes strike Darwin, sinking about 50 ships. USR. Submarines engaged invasion forces at Bali and Timor on February 20th. Success was minimal, the torpedoes failing to perform. Lew Wallace, commander of Tarpon, ran aground in the poorly charted Bowling Strait on February 23rd. An emergency effort to refloat the boat consumed critical time. February 24th brought more submarine patrols. Encountering Japanese convoys, invasion forces were sighted, but few confirmed sinkings occurred. Freddie Warder, commanding Seawolf, faced significant frustration. He nearly grounded his boat in a shallow coral cul-de-sac. On February 25th, several submarine attacks on cruisers and transports were launched. All torpedoes missed, a bitter routine for the crews. The Battle of the Java Sea marked a catastrophic turning point. The Allied surface fleet, led by Rear Admiral Carroll Dorman, suffered a decisive defeat. Crucial cruisers and destroyers were lost without inflicting significant damage. The Japanese invasion convoy remained largely untouched. This sealed Java's fate. On February 27th, Dave Hertz Perch attempted a contact report. Antenna damage impaired its ability to transmit, a small but critical failure. The Japanese continued to elude submarines, pressing their advantage. By late February and early March, the Battle of the Java Sea was over. The Allied surface fleet was devastated. Perch was depth-charged and badly damaged north of Surabaya on March 1st. Commander Hurt surfaced his boat, attempting a desperate escape. On March 2nd, Perch was again depth-charged and crippled. Trapped by enemy cruisers and destroyers, she was forced to scuttle. The fall of Java was inevitable, a strategic island lost. This marked a significant blow to Allied morale and operational capacity. The devastation of the Asiatic Fleet submarine force was profound. The operational period brought extreme hardship and exhaustion. Vessels were lost, and a significant psychological toll weighed on crews. Only 10 ships were confirmed sunk in Japanese records over 4 months by Asiatic submarines. This included 1 destroyer and 1 troopship in February, 1 tanker and 1 aircraft ferry in March. This meager tally stood against a massive invasion fleet. This campaign exposed critical vulnerabilities in Allied intelligence. Flaws in command structure and equipment demanded urgent attention. Yet, amidst this overwhelming defeat, heroism was undeniable. Individual acts of bravery, seamanship, and perseverance by submarine crews persisted. Even in the face of limited success, their courage shone through. Early American submarine efforts around Java, though valiant, were severely hampered. Factors beyond the control of their crews, not individual incompetence, dictated their lack of success. The defense of Java was a foregone conclusion. Overwhelming Japanese force and intelligence failures had sealed its destiny. It was far more than a simple matter of Allied bravery failing. The systemic flaws revealed here were a stark, urgent lesson. This urgent lesson echoed across the Pacific, even within new, formidable deployments. Brisbane emerged as an enormous enterprise, the largest concentration of U.S. March, submarine power. Squadrons 8 and 10 were transferred, creating a potent, centralized force. Yet this concentration faced immediate debilitating challenges. A critical flaw was the tactical misapplication of these valuable assets. Often, reactive deployment based on ultra-intelligence led to futile chasing about. Submarines were directed towards heavily defended areas, not the Japanese logistical lifeline. The more impactful target, oil tankers, was consistently overlooked. Beyond strategy, technological failures plagued every patrol. Persistent issues with torpedoes undermined even the most aggressive skippers. Premature explosions, erratic running, and outright failure to detonate were commonplace. This directly contributed to a lower success rate and profound crew discouragement. Early patrol experiences, like those of the Wahoo under Pinky Kennedy, fueled this perception. The crew felt the submarines were not making a significant record. Adding to the operational complexities was a tug-of-war for control. General MacArthur and Admiral Halsey vied for command of the Brisbane submarine force. Captain Ralph Christie, heading Task Force 42, often found himself a diplomat in this struggle. These strategic and technical hurdles overshadowed individual acts of courage. Even the bold attack by Barney McMahon in Drum on the light aircraft carrier Ruho was part of a larger, difficult picture. Roy Benson of Trigger, laying mines near Tokyo Bay and playing Christmas carols, exemplified individual initiative. Yet, the overall strategic impact of the submarine force remained diminished. This was despite the enormous concentration of power in Brisbane. The period from October through December 1942 saw 24 war patrols from Brisbane. These 24 patrols resulted in only 6 Japanese ships sunk by 3 fleet boats. Simultaneously, the broader strategic landscape was shifting. The Battle of Guadalcanal, from November 12–15, 1942, was a significant turning point. This brutal struggle forced Japan onto the defensive, shifting the strategic initiative to the US. 120,000 Japanese troops were committed to the new assault. The battleship Hai was sunk and Kirishima scuttled, highlighting the intensity. While submarines were not the primary driver, their presence was part of this larger shift. The shift to defensive for Japan in the South Pacific was now undeniable. The threat to vital Allied territories diminished, but the submarine role felt underutilized. A more aggressive strategic offensive against Japanese logistics, especially tankers, was needed, but the persistent issues with torpedoes, like those faced by Tex Mewini in Saw Tilda, were ignored. Mewini directly contradicted Admiral English on the issue of premature torpedo explosions. The myth that premature explosions were not occurring was repeatedly debunked by skippers. Another myth, that all depth-charge attacks resulted in sinkings, was also far from true. Japanese attackers often left before confirming kills. Oil slicks from leaks could be mistaken for fatal ruptures. The loss of experienced skippers, due to reassignment or career diversification, further drained expertise. This general underutilization of assets extended beyond Brisbane to Fremantle. At Fremantle, Admiral Lockwood faced an acute shortage of viable torpedoes. He received only about 18 torpedoes a month, while boats fired 75. Bureaucratic paralysis at Newport, where Ralph Christie was tasked to fix production, crippled the effort. The defective torpedo exploders, the Pi.2, were a critical bottleneck. Skippers like Red Ramage in Trout experienced numerous torpedo failures. His efforts against large tankers like Kyokuyo Maru and Nishin Maru were undermined. Ramage fired 4, then 5 torpedoes at the battleship Kirishima, with limited effect. Chester Nimitz Jr., exec on Sturgeon, even received a Silver Star despite persistent torpedo issues. The Sea Dragon under Pete Farrell struggled with old Mark X torpedoes, a nightmare of prematures. Greyback under Edward Clark Stephan fired 24 torpedoes across 8 attacks, with poor accuracy. The aggressive Fresher under Moke Milliken, despite success with its 5-inch deck gun, also reported failures. Even Creed Burlingame's Silversides, with its admirable 4-ship sinking total, faced torpedo issues. This led to immense frustration and the relief of many competent commanders. Don McGregor of Gar and Bruce Carr of Grenadier were examples of this unforgiving climate. This period of late 1942 was a complex mix of individual heroism and systemic failure. Overall, 350 war patrols were conducted by Pacific-based submarines in 1942. Claimed sinkings reached 274 Japanese ships for 1.6 million tons. Yet, post-war Japanese records confirmed only 180 ships for 725,000 tons. This stark reality revealed a failure of imagination and strategy at the highest levels. German U-boats sank an equivalent tonnage in just 2 months, February-March 1942. US submarines were too often dispersed across less impactful missions. Coastal defense, commando raids, and reconnaissance diverted assets. A reluctance to adopt proven German U-boat strategies from both world wars was evident. Admiral King, Edwards, Nimitz, Hart, Wilkes, Withers, English, Lockwood, Christie, Fife were all part of this. They collectively failed to establish a unified, aggressive strategy. The myth that simply sinking tonnage, regardless of target, was sufficient, was debilitating. The true goal, strangling Japanese supply lines, was tragically neglected. Japanese merchant marine shipping, 5.4 million tons at the start of the war, was 5.2 million by year-end 1942. This was a net loss of only 200,000 tons, excluding tankers. Japanese tankers actually increased by 111,000 tons, reaching 686,000 by end of 1942. The total net loss of Japanese shipping was a meaningless 89,000 tons. The strategic over-reliance on ultra-intelligence for targeting capital ships yielded minimal results. It often led to disadvantages rather than the crippling of logistics. The lack of live controlled tests for torpedo exploders by end of 1942 was astounding. This was despite widespread suspicion of their malfunction from skippers like Tex Mewini. The Mark XIV torpedo's deep-running fault was finally being confirmed by Lockwood. By the end of 1942, a critical realization slowly dawned. Interdiction of merchant shipping, though yielding fewer claimed sinkings, was the only truly damaging mission. Admiral English's planned trip in January 1943 hinted at a potential strategic re-evaluation. The campaign had been a stark lesson in strategic misdirection and the importance of centralized, effective planning. The costly lessons of 1942 would finally begin to reshape the silent war beneath the waves.